Prime Minister Narendra Modi has invoked the tri-services of the Indian Armed Forces in the battle against COVID for a sense of the effort that has already been made and how even more effort is currently underway. We want to go across live and exclusive at this time. Joining us at this moment is General Bipin Rawat, Chief of India's Defence Staff. General Rawat, thank you. This is indeed a wartime situation, except that the enemy is not Pakistan or China, but rather an invisible virus. Can you, at the outset, sir, please lay out for everyone watching across the country at this time the level of effort already being made and the actual tangible takeaways that the Army, Navy and Air Force have delivered in this battle against the coronavirus?
Thank you, Rahul, for inviting me here. But before I come to answering your specific question, let me first address the issue of the role and responsibilities of the armed forces. Now, we all know that the armed forces are responsible for national security, which includes security of our territorial borders, maritime borders, and the oceans. But at the same time, we are also responsible for the internal security of the nation. Now, when it comes to internal security, we are normally concerned about law and order issues when we are summoned in or requisitioned for maintenance of law and order when it goes out of control of the state police or the other supporting forces that are there, the central paramilitary organizations. But let me tell you, let us now straight get on to the Disaster Management Act of 2005. The Disaster Management Act enacted in 2005 very clearly defined the role and responsibilities under which the armed forces can be called in to support the nation. Now here, of course, the disasters were identified as tsunamis, as earthquakes, and such other issues, floods. Though the pandemic and the COVID situation as is prevailing in our country now was not specifically identified, but I dare say this actually does fall within the gamut of the DMA Act 2005. And therefore, I think the armed forces and all the other organizations in the country which possess the capabilities and wherewithal to come to the assistance of the government at this juncture have a constitutional obligation to step forward and do whatever they can in these times of crisis. And here I would like to quote, there's an old Tamil treatise which is referred to as Thirakural, and there it identifies the national characteristics. And the national characteristics identified 2000 years ago in this Tamil treatise Thirakural says that the nation must give higher priority to maintenance of a healthy environment in the country, the well-being of their people, harmonious living amongst the people. There must be a strong economy for every nation. There must be strong and healthy population. I would like to reiterate this. And finally, there must be a strong defense. So therefore, you find that when we look at national power, the pillars of national power is military and economy, and people become a part of it. So I think at this time, there is a constitutional obligation on the defense services and all other such similar organizations to step in and support the people of our nation and their government to the maximum extent possible. Coming now specifically to what you wanted me to address.
So you would have seen this debate raging. I'm coming back to that in a moment, but I want to build on what you're saying at this moment. You would have seen, sir, there's a debate that's been raging on social media and in some military veterans groups about whether this is indeed the job of the armed forces, because many have felt that, does this reflect the lack of capacity of the civilian administration via the armed forces having to step in? Why can't the government, its system, its bureaucrats deliver, because that is their job and this is not the army's job? There's been that controversy or that conversation as well. How do you respond to that? How do you see that?
You see, therefore, I referred to the Disaster Management Act of 2005, which says the armed forces must step in when there are disasters. We have been stepping in when there have been tsunamis. We have been stepping in at times of flood, when the flood relief had to be provided to the various states. Cyclones have been affecting our coastline. We have been stepping in there. We have been stepping in times of earthquakes. Look at what happened in the Bhuj earthquake when it happened a number of years ago. So the armed forces have stepped in. Now to say that a disaster of this kind, well, whether we want to call it a disaster or we want to call it a national emergency, I know people are very chary about using the word emergency here, but then whatever we call it, I think this falls in the Disaster Management Act, wherein the armed forces of the Union and all other agencies which have the capacity and wherewithal to step in must put their best foot forward and support the government machine. So I, for one, and the armed forces, present leadership of the armed forces, we are very clear that we need to step in and provide support to the government. We do have limitation of resources, but that notwithstanding, certainly we can spare our resources at this time to come to the aid of our nation.
So can you give specific details about how extra resources have been mobilized from within the services for this wartime-like effort against the coronavirus?
Yes, I would like to address how this is being tackled in the Ministry of Defense. The Ministry of Defense has decided to adopt a holistic approach where the head of our organization, that is the Raksha Mantri himself, is issuing directions based on the feedback that he is getting from the various states and the various other organizations through which he is interacting. Based on that, he is giving directions. These directions are being passed down directly to the service headquarters, the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. The Raksha Mantri has enabled the answer to the emergency pass so that they can procure equipment, whatever is necessary in these difficult times of COVID. So what I find is that the directions are being issued by the Raksha Mantri, the execution has been delegated to the respective service headquarters, and in between now comes the Office of the Defense Secretary. He is becoming the coordinator, because coordination is required not just between the person who is issuing the directions and the person who are executing on ground, but there are other agencies in the Ministry of Defense who also need to get their act together and support the effort of the Ministry of Defense, like the DRDO, the defense production. So everybody is working together, and therefore the coordination is being done by the Defense Secretary, who has the control over the medical services of the armed forces. The DG Armed Forces Medical Services is looking into the medical issues, while the service headquarters are providing the support and making sure that the administrative issues, the logistic issues are taken care of by the service headquarters. We have stepped in a very big way, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, and I don't think I would like to elaborate what each service has done, because this is out in the media. The Raksha Mantri has spoken about it, the Defense Secretary has spoken about it, the service chiefs have come out in the open, and I think it is well known. What we are now looking at is, we are studying the national trends as to where the COVID is now escalating, where the situation is likely to turn ugly, where we might have to step in the extra effort, and where there is some easing happening. But wherever it is easing off does not mean that the situation is well under control. So where we need to ramp up our efforts, beef up our efforts, we are gradually moving resources into those areas. And let me tell you, what we have been able to identify is the problem emerging in the southern states, problem emerging in Uttarakhand, problem emerging in some of the eastern states of ours, West Bengal, and some of the other eastern states. So these states are being identified where we might have to put in larger resources to support the people and the state governments. I don't think I need to specifically identify what all
these are also states where healthcare infrastructure is the weakest, because if you, for example, take the states of eastern India or the states of the hilly regions and the bordering areas where there's a lot of army deployment, is also where civilian healthcare infrastructure is the weakest. Are you being able to create extra capacities? Are you leaning, General, on capacities within the armed forces for this effort, or have you been able to mobilize extra capacities in a short amount of time? And can you give us some details, please?
Yeah, wherever the health infrastructure is lacking, we are coordinating with the state governments. All our local formation commanders have been told to get in touch with the local administration, analyze the resources that they have, and wherever the resources are lacking, we have some wartime contingencies available to us. We have field hospitals in our divisions which have got capability of creating hospital facilities which are temporary in nature. So these are being deployed. Every division has a capability of deploying what we call an advanced dressing station, which has the capability of deploying between 30 to 45 beds under temporary arrangements. So where we find the infrastructure is lacking, these temporary arrangements are being made. Now that we have been given the emergency powers, the oxygen cylinders, the oxygen generators, the ventilators were purchased during phase one and now are being continuously purchased and being sometime from the internal industries which are making them, and even we are not hesitating in resorting to imports of some of these essential items. So we are beefing up our capabilities to support the state government wherever it is being necessitated. And let me show you that we are willing to walk the extra
So one
mile.
of the big challenges. So one of the big challenges is the transportation of oxygen, especially to areas where there are no oxygen manufacturing capabilities. I was speaking to one of India's largest oxygen manufacturers, and he said there are several states where they don't produce any oxygen at all. Especially in rural India, there's very little existing demand for oxygen, and therefore when there is a huge demand, that becomes a big problem. The army has greater logistical capabilities than any other body in our country. How are you mobilizing your resources to ensure that oxygen is available when it is needed, where it is needed, General?
See, unfortunately, the armed forces do not have the capacity to generate oxygen because we do not have oxygen plants. Even for our own hospitals, we bank on the civilian agencies for providing us the oxygen. But let me tell you, in these areas, we are therefore buying oxygen concentrators because we have generators. Even if there is no electric supply, we have generators. So we can make sure that the people get oxygen concentrators. And gradually we are making sure that these oxygen concentrators move forward as much as possible. Let me tell you, we are expecting about 5,000 oxygen concentrators being made available to us at Singapore. And the moment these come, these will be deployed in areas where we find the oxygen is lacking. In areas, in the urban areas, in big cities where you can have these big tankers moving, where you can have these kind of facilities being created, it is possible. But wherever oxygen concentrators are required or where we have to move cylinders, we will carry the cylinders to the areas of refilling and move them. Unfortunately, the filled cylinders cannot be moved by air. That is the restriction that we have in airlifting them. But the empty cylinders can be lifted by air. Once they are filled, we can even deploy our resources. We have a very good logistic supply chain mechanism which functions in our army, and this is being used wherever possible and will continue to provide support wherever the states so demand.
So how has the coronavirus impacted service personnel of the armed forces? Not just in peacetime stations, but also given our extensive deployment along the China border, the Pakistan border, the threats of those two countries and their armies, especially China, continues to remain alive. So how has the virus impacted our border deployments, and also what's happening in the hinterland and the peacetime area, sir?
See, as far as the border areas are concerned, we are following a very strict regime. Anybody who's required to be inducted to the front line when the troops are deployed on the borders, we are making sure that they undergo tests, they undergo quarantine before they get deployed forward. So what is happening is, yes, it is leading to some delay in the deployment, but we are not letting our guard down to make sure that the COVID does not spread among the frontline troops, and I think that we've managed very well, that the COVID has not spread to the frontline troops. As far as the hinterland is concerned, the urban areas are concerned, Delhi, for example, yes, we are also facing the brunt of COVID because here there is intermingling of population that is happening with the civilians. And as you know, this time the COVID is spreading like an aerosol. Through an aerosol, it is spreading through the air. So our people cannot be quarantined completely from this. So we are being affected. We are taking care of them. But we have, again, very strict home isolation protocols being followed. Hospitalization only for those who require emergency care. So that is the way we are mitigating the problem. We are facing this problem in the hinterland and urban area, but not to the extent as much as a civilian population. And that, I think, is happening because we have the capability and capacity to carry out isolation. Our people are provided accommodation where we can ensure safety distancing We provide them masks and sanitizers to the maximum extent possible, which may not be possible with the civilian population. Like we are seeing, instructions coming in that people should have, if somebody is tested COVID, he must use a separate toilet. But we know that the people in our country living in difficult areas and small areas are living in one-room houses with one toilet. How do they separate the toilet out? How can the family of four use only and allow only one person to use the toilet? Fortunately for us, we are not facing this problem, and therefore we have been able to mitigate to a large extent.
So it is around this time last year that China played its mischief along the border. Of course, now we are far more awake and far more aware, but the fact remains that in 4 friction areas, China has refused to back down. India remains engulfed with the coronavirus. Is there a concern that this could be an opportunity for China to try and play mischief? Are you looking out for any acts of mischief by the PLA? How do you assess, and what's your message to the country about people who are watching at this time and may be concerned about our enemies' moves along the Himalayan ranges?
We carry out risk assessment and risk analysis from time to time. And in this time of COVID, we have carried out in-depth risk analysis and assessment as to what can happen. So therefore, we have ensured that we have minimum presence on the borders to prevent being surprised. We are maintaining reserve forces in depth areas to ensure that should something go wrong, we are able to position troops at the place of our choosing, should it so happen. So I think, while we are taking some degree of risk, because we have to make sure that we also support the people, and some people have been pulled back in our effort to support the nation in this fight against COVID. But after carrying out a risk assessment and risk analysis, we have identified areas where we think we need to keep our guard higher, areas where we can possibly lower our guard after carrying out a risk assessment. And let me tell you, all our commanders are trained in carrying out risk analysis and risk assessment. And let me also tell you one thing. We give great importance to those commanders and great weightage to those commanders who have the ability to take risks. Because the ability to take risks is in your mind. If you start feeling that I have to defend every inch of my territory, then I feel you're not a good commander. You have to carry out an analysis as to where is the threat, where the adversary can take advantage and where you can take advantage, a counter advantage. So based on this, I think you need to start thinning out from certain areas under these conditions, yet make sure that you do not lower the guard to such an extent that you can be surprised.
Sir, one of your big challenges as Chief of Defence Staff and the first person in uniform to hold this position is to increase the interoperability of the 3 services. And this is really our first war. It isn't a war at this moment physically with China or with Pakistan. It's a war against a virus. How do you assess the ability of the position of CDS to bring into play the actual capabilities of the 3 services together? What is it that we're able to do in this war which could hold a portent for what happens in the future? Because the 3 services are directly under your command, one person is in charge rather than having all the 3 services acting in silo. Are you feeling the change? Do you think you're being able to make an impact yet, or is it too soon to judge?
We have never seen this kind of synergy among these 3 services. And I think we carry out regular interactions with the 3 service chiefs. And I think the kind of positivity that is being generated, in fact, what we want to do, they are actually walking the extra mile to ensure that they move forward, ensure that we work together. You will be surprised that even today in this issue that is so problematic, the Air Force, without even getting directions, is supporting the army in moving equipment, in moving forces from one sector to the other. If we were able to send additional troops to Ladakh, how did it happen? It just happened at the Northern Army Commander level and the AOC JNK. These 2 people coordinated and made sure that troops could move in, equipment could move in, and even today as I speak to you, equipment and logistic support is moving in by air wherever required, no questions are being asked. The air chief, I think at times the things do not even come to the service headquarters. These are all being resolved at the ground level. And why and how is this happening? This is happening because obviously the directions are coming from the top hierarchy, the top leadership of the 3 services. The time has come to work in a joint manner. We have to synergize our resources, and that is what is happening. hospitals that we are today operating, for those that have been constructed by DRDO or other agencies, we've got mixed group of people. We've got doctors from the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force operating together. Nobody is questioning each other's seniority. Nobody is questioning each other as to you are wearing blues or because everybody today is wearing a PPE. So in a PPE, everybody is today in blues. We are all providing support as a unified structure so that the maximum possible assistance can be given. And let me tell you, no questions are being asked as to why I am being deployed here. The naval doctor being deployed in Ahmedabad, which is well away from his place of deployment, him deployed in Bombay, he is not questioning. An Air Force chap being moved to Varanasi, he is not questioning. It is all happening because the top leadership has issued directions, and the leadership at the highest level is controlling the administrative and the logistic support required for a situation like this, not just for the COVID, but also for operational issues. And you will soon see the manner in which jointness and integration will move forward. Yes.
As an army officer's son and somebody who's grown up seeing the problems when the three services are not fully aligned, this indeed, General Rawat, is music to my ears. But has the pandemic delayed the task of bringing the three services together in a military operational perspective while they are cooperating in fighting the pandemic? Has it pushed the deadline for trying to ensure that we're able to move towards a joint services command in different sectors?
Well, the moment I get over with this, at 12 o'clock, I have a meeting and where we will be discussing the way forward for the Air Defence and the Maritime Command, because we want to push the cabinet note for approval. So I think we will be taking a final call on this and moving it for Raksha Mantri's approval before it moves to the CCS. So I don't think this has really affected, because while we are working from home, we have made small study teams who are working together, who have been tested together. Not necessarily that they have to come to the office, they are living within their living areas, they are meeting, but the work must go on and is going on. We have made particular officers responsible and given them the charter and their work.
Well, I'm going to leave it over there. This indeed is a war, and it's a war against an invisible enemy of a kind we haven't faced. And I think all of us as citizens are grateful for the effort the armed forces are making to try and ensure that we're able to move logistics at a scale which otherwise is simply not possible. I think that's the unique ability the armed forces have, to just take the war to a completely different scale, or the fight in this virus to a different scale. And thank you so much, General Bipin Rawat, for your time, and wish you all the best and more power to you and your boys.
Thank you, Rahul, and be assured that the armed forces stand by the nation, stand by the people of our nation and the government, and we will walk that extra mile to overcome this crisis that we are facing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. God bless you, and thank you for your time. Thank you.